Hello, everybody. It's Linda Lorelle, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Our Voices Matter podcast. We are coming to you live today on Clubhouse, which is the new social audio platform that is pretty much taking the world by storm. For those of you who are joining us in the audience on the app, we do want to advise you that we are recording. You should also know that the topic of today's episode, mental health, parenting, and purpose, might be triggering for some. So please do take that into consideration. Our goal today, as we kick off Mental Health Awareness Month, is to have a thoughtful, helpful conversation about mental health, including suicide prevention, with a focus on parenting. That said, the stories and opinions you hear on today's episode are not in any way to be considered as medical advice. If you are struggling and you need someone to talk to right away, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. My guests today are all new colleagues and friends that I have met on this app over the last couple of months, and I'm very excited to share our conversation with you today. Tamu Lewis reached out to me wanting to share her story, her experiences, and her lessons learned after having two family members diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Tamu is co-founder, along with her mother, of the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to erasing the stigma associated with mental illness, advancing holistic health treatments, and improving the lives of all those impacted. Tamu is also a parent support coach, passionate about helping other parents who are raising children with mental health challenges. Also joining us today is Deandra Hennemann. Deandra is a licensed mental health counselor and coach who's been in practice for almost 10 years now. Deandra has worked with sexual assault and human trafficking survivors and is herself a survivor of a traumatic brain injury. And Joshua Donaldson is founder of When the Music Stops, a San Francisco-based nonprofit and community that supports emotional and mental health through music, connection, and love. Josh is a survivor of suicide. We're going to begin our conversation with Tamu sharing her story, and then we'll bring in our panelists for further discussion. So now we're going to get to it. Tamu, I was so honored when you reached out and said that you wanted to share your story. Tell us about the Lee Thompson Young Foundation, how it came about, and why it is so important for you to share your story.
So the Lee Thompson Young Foundation, my mother and I created that in 2014 after losing my brother, actor Lee Thompson Young, to suicide in 2013. So he suffered in silence with bipolar disorder. And the reason that we created the foundation was to help promote mental health education and also awareness and try to erase the stigma. Mm-hmm. So part of his reason for suffering in silence was that he felt ashamed. He felt like he couldn't share. He felt like no one would understand, and also that he might be blackballed in Hollywood.
Yeah. So tell us, your brother was a very well-known actor at the height of his career when all of this was going on, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. So he was actually filming Rizzoli and Isles on TNT. I think they were in their fourth season at the time. And he's kind of first known as the famous Jet Jackson on the Disney Channel. So that was kind of his first big break, but he had been in movies and other TV shows and was at the time filming that Rizzoli and Isles on TNT when we lost him.
So people would look at him and say, oh, he's living the good life, right? He's got everything you could possibly want. He's got a successful career. He's an actor. He's in front of people. He's making money. But there was something going on inside of him.
Right.
That no one could see.
Right. And part of it, I think he was so successful at masking it because he was a professional actor. So that made it even more difficult for those to determine from the outside. He was under a doctor's care, so he was seeing a psychiatrist. And my mom and I knew of the bipolar disorder diagnosis, but no one else knew. So no extended family, no friends in LA, and none of his coworkers on set. So after we lost him on set, they said that they did notice a difference, that he seemed a little more tired when he came to rehearsals. And they asked him, how he was doing. And he just said, I'm just tired. So he never missed a day of work. He, hit all the lines. And so everything appeared to be fine. And my thing is that I feel like if they had known the diagnosis, then maybe they would have responded differently when they noticed a difference in his behavior, and they may not have just accepted the explanation that I'm just tired.
Yeah. So this goes to the stigma, right?
Right.
There is this societal stigma about mental illness. And when someone is struggling with it, they're afraid to reveal it because they're concerned about whatever the repercussions might be, whether it's being blackballed, as you say, in Hollywood, or being othered by your friends and family and whatever. So go ahead, continue the story from there.
So I will say that, just being fully transparent, even though I was aware of the bipolar disorder diagnosis, I wasn't well educated on it, because he did spend a lot of time appearing to be well. So there wasn't like a consistent concern or worry, or like us talking to his doctors, because he appeared to be well. And so part of the whole promoting mental health awareness and education was also because that's when we became more educated after we lost him, and became passionate about sharing the information and working in the prevention area, and also working with youth to try to get ahead of it, right? In terms of building coping skills and resilience and all of these kind of protective factors that might prevent someone from getting to that point. And also help them know that they are not alone. Like, you literally are not alone, even though you feel like that. And so that you can be aware of resources and reach out and have these conversations.
So let's talk about the impact on you and your family after your brother made the tragic decision to take his life. How did you deal with that? And then how did that impact your mental health as an individual, and then that of all of your family members?
Yes, it was devastating, to say the least. And I am the big sister. So Lee was actually born when I was 12. So I always felt like his protector, his junior mom. I should have been there. So it was very difficult for me. I felt like a piece of my heart had been taken away. And I have 2 daughters and a husband and a job and all this that I had to try to continue to maintain while grieving. And the weight of it became too much. And I had to seek therapy myself. And I remember times when I felt like almost like a panic attack. Like, I would be driving somewhere to do some work for the foundation and spreading this message. And I would feel like I couldn't breathe, like my chest was tightening up, and I'd have to pull over. And I had feelings of not only grief, but of anger, because he was gone. And also, he's gone.
Were you angry at him, angry at yourself? Who were you angry with?
Both. I was angry at him and myself. And I would feel like, okay, I'm here trying to spread this message and try to continue on and get through this grief. But I felt like it was too much. So I was angry about that. I was angry about needing help myself, because I felt like I'm trying to do all these good things. So why am I having these difficulties with the grief, with the depression, and just feeling like the weight and the load was so heavy from the loss of my brother.
So I'm going to bring Deandra in here for a minute. So Deandra, from a therapist perspective, I saw you nodding your head like you can really relate to what Tamu was saying. Is this your experience from what you've seen in your practice?
Yeah, so when people are contemplating suicide, they feel very defeated. They feel lost, overwhelmed. They will feel like they have no support. Even sometimes in coming to a therapist, they will feel like, well, what if I tell you this and you judge me for it? And so that's why it's so important to make sure that that therapeutic alliance, that relationship is there, so that when they do feel these thoughts and these situations arise and they feel very overwhelmed and unsupported, that we can put things in place and they're okay with, hey, I think I should touch base with you daily because I just want to make sure you're okay. And if something comes up, I want you to know that I'm here to support you and walk you through this. I understand that the thoughts can be overwhelming. I understand that you're tired, you're frustrated, you feel like maybe you've lost your purpose or can't find your way. And so rather than you do that alone, allow me to take this journey with you so I can lighten the load and carry some of that burden. If we don't do that as mental health professionals, the suicide rate will go up. Unfortunately, in the Pacific Northwest where I was prior to coming here, they had a very high suicide rate of males specifically. And it was because of that stigma of, maybe I'm not a man anymore if I tell someone that I'm struggling, that I want to cry, that I'm tired, I'm fatigued all the time, that I feel like I'm not holding up my end of the bargain, I'm not doing my duties, I'm not helping my family, maybe I'm not putting food on the table or bringing in money. So all of these things are very contributing factors to men committing suicide, women as well, but men typically don't always talk about it.
And Josh, I know you can definitely relate to that. Share with our audience a little bit about your story.
Okay, so my name is Joshua Donaldson. I'm the CEO and founder of a 501c3 nonprofit organization called When the Music Stops. And like Linda mentioned, we support emotional and mental health and suicide prevention through music, community, and love. And I was in the music and entertainment business for over 20 years, 22, 23 years. I've traveled the world. I lived in Spain and New York and Los Angeles, and I spent 14 years in Las Vegas as a casino hospitality executive. And my life from the outside looked wonderful. I was a partner in a restaurant and art galleries and all kinds of great stuff. And it was always go, go, go. And, lots of celebrities and high profile people and, all the bells and whistles that somebody would think is the meanings of a good life. But I didn't have a meaningful connection, and I felt shallow and empty. And I didn't realize it at the time. It's a kind of a subconscious thing that slowly builds over 2 decades. And I just felt no genuine connection, didn't feel, I internally felt more and more isolated. Where I was social, I would go out and I'd be out and I'd be seeking escapism from my own thoughts and what's going on. And it would slowly creep up on me. My depression, my sadness, my isolation, all my feelings. And it culminated shortly after New Year's Eve, January the 6th, 2019, while on vacation. I had, with a bunch of friends, I had a nervous breakdown. And then 3 days later, after running away from all my friends, I attempted to take my life in a very extreme and violent fashion. I shouldn't technically be here medically, but the police in Miami-Dade County and the Dade County Sheriff's Department and the EMTs and the fire and the surgeons and the doctors, they were like, this kind of thing happens every 5 or 10 years or something like that. There's like something really extreme that it's not your time. And I don't know Another thing that I struggle with is I don't know why it wasn't my time, and sometimes it's somebody else's time. So that's something that's just, that I also is still in the back of my head. But go
Josh,
ahead.
let me ask you this, connecting to what Deandra had said about sometimes the way that a man will feel because he's not living up to whatever the societal norms are, what a man is supposed to be. A man should not be asking for help. Did you go through any of that, or was that not there for you?
Maybe subconsciously. I never thought about it because I didn't realize that I was hurting. Because I was constantly making more money and drinking more and going to more dinners and going to on more vacations, I didn't realize that this big empty hole in my heart was getting larger. And so it was a kind of a subconscious thing that was happening. I was running from my own pain, which is what a lot of us do that are suicidal, to be honest. Yeah. We don't necessarily realize what's happening until it's too late, until you have that thought and the desperation of feeling like a disappointment or a failure or feeling alone. Or, for me, I have 4,000 contacts in my phone. And if I have a moment of like overwhelming panic or sadness, I would look at my phone and I would just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, because I would realize, oh my goodness, there's no one that I can reach out to that I feel will understand me. Or
so they're contacts, but they're not connections. They're not people that you really
absolutely
connected to. So Tamu, obviously your brother Lee was feeling a lot of what Josh just talked about, and then some, and then you and your family were left to deal with the aftermath. But you have another family member who is struggling with bipolar. So talk to us about that, because this is one of your children.
Yes. So my oldest daughter, who is 19 now, has bipolar disorder as well. The experience with Lee that did sort of inform me in a way in terms of parenting, but it's different as a parent. As a mom, I want to be able to fix things, right? I want to see the best doctors I can find, the best therapists, try this approach, that approach, figure out how I can somehow relieve some of the struggle for my child. And one of the frustrations from my perspective of dealing with mental health is that it is trial and error. So something that her psychiatrist or therapist might suggest that work for others in their practice might not work for me and my daughter, right? Or something that worked last month, now today it doesn't work anymore in terms of like an approach or a certain way that I say things or a certain routine that we put in place. And so the trial and error of feeling like you're seeking advice from the professionals, you're doing what they say, you're reading these books, you're going to this therapy, and then your child is still suffering, your child still has ups and downs. It's almost like I felt helpless in a way, like, why would this be happening to my child? And I've already lost my brother, right?
How old was she when she was diagnosed?
I want to say around 16. We had been seeing a psychiatrist though from the age of 7, because she began to have really a lot of issues at school, even as a 7-year-old. And we have a really good pediatrician who we felt very comfortable with, and we trusted her, and she referred us to a psychiatrist, and it just happened to be a fit with my daughter. I know a lot of people have some challenges finding someone that they fit with, that their child will actually open up to. But my daughter loved her psychiatrist, and she was able to work with her. So there were different things showing up, and Deandra can speak to this, but typically they don't want to diagnose a child because you have all these hormones and different things happening. So it's hard to tell if there's actually like a particular diagnosis or if there's other things going on. So even though we were seeing her from the age of 7, her psychiatrist, that the bipolar disorder came after like multiple like battery of tests and being able to observe behaviors and different things happening. So my daughter was being treated for ADHD. I can just mention that from that.
So how did you deal with that period of her life and your family's life, not really knowing all of what was going on, and trying to find the answers, but knowing that something was still not quite right? What did you learn from that experience that you want other parents to understand from what you went through?
I will say that I learned patience and resilience. And I learned that as a mom, it's actually not all about my child who was suffering, right? Even though as a parent, I felt like it was all consuming, that her illness was all consuming, and we all had to do all of these things to sort of try to make it better in a way. But I realized that as a parent, I needed additional support to get through this. So I actually went back to my therapist, who I had worked with for grief counseling, to help me with parenting and the stress and the challenges that I went through as a parent trying to help my daughter with the mental illness. So that support from my therapist was very helpful. And so that's something that I want to share with other parents. And then also, when we were at a really challenging spot, like a crisis moment, I was able to find some in-home therapy for the entire family. And that, I feel like that made the difference. As your child gets older, the whole, I'm going to be 18, independent, and by law, they don't actually have to go to these different therapists you're taking them to, right? They have to give their consent as an adult then. So kind of leading up to the turning 18, we were able to benefit from this in-home therapy that was for the entire family. And what it did for my daughter was give her the perspective that, you know what, there's something that my parents can do differently too. So it's almost like it lifted the whole.
In other words, it's not just me. It's not just me.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's what they did. They came in and they were able to get like input from Naya and say, like, what is it that would help you? There's certain things that your parents are saying, some really simple things that we thought was relaying love and care, and she was receiving differently. So there's really simple things like the way you say something or the particular words that you use. And that was able to really make a big difference for us.
So Josh, I see you shaking your head in agreement. Weigh in on that. What the choice of words that people use when speaking with someone who is struggling with their mental health. Tell me why you were shaking your head in agreement there.
For me, that was, I think that it's also, so I have diagnosed hypomania, which is something that I'd never heard of. And it's funny because I'm not bipolar, but I'm hypomania, and it's like a cousin of bipolar, but not bipolar. I don't know. I guess
we'll get Deandra to tell us about it in a minute. But go ahead, Josh.
I think it's on the spectrum. But either way, so we have a lot of similar characteristics. So it's not always that somebody's saying something wrong, or it's that we're receiving it differently. And it's the way that our brains are wired, so that maybe what you're saying or the way that you're wording it, for whatever reason, our receptors are neurologically receiving it in a completely different way than the way that you're doing it. And that might be something that comes with hypomania or comes with bipolar or whatever that is. And so there's a disconnect in communication. So which further isolates us from you and the support, because you're trying to be loving and we're seeing it as something different. And I could absolutely attest to that only from a firsthand perspective of having people try to care and me take it the wrong way. And so it's a struggle. It's not always therapists too, peer support. I think that somebody that's struggling with what I'm struggling with is what helps the most. You know, when people reach out to When the Music Stops and they're suicidal, unfortunately, that's when I feel at home, because I know their pain. I know what they're going through. I know that thought process. So in that moment, I can hold space with someone because I understand. And so somebody who's struggling with bipolar, you know, is only going to really feel heard by somebody who also struggles from bipolar. And there's a difference between therapy and peer support, but peer support really helps a lot.
That's so interesting. So Deandra, I'm going to let you weigh in here because we've had a lot of conversations since you last spoke up. So tell us what you're thinking.
So you mentioned hypomania. So hypomania is, I guess, in the broad perspective to help people understand. So it's because it's often misdiagnosed or missed in general, because it does mimic the same symptoms of the manic phase of bipolar disorder. So decreased need for sleep, increased attention, sometimes decreased attention, rapid racing thoughts, on the go. So you have all these symptoms, right? And so we're thinking, oh, okay, this person might be bipolar. However, they may not have the opposite pole, which is depression, to the severe point where we see that characteristic every couple of months pole switch. And as it changes for everybody. I've seen people cycle in the same month. I've seen people cycle in the same week. I've seen people cycle years apart where they're depressed for an entire year. And all of a sudden, it's literally like a light switch. They are happy and joyful and things are good and they feel good and they want to go out and do more things and they feel vibrant and they're laughing and joking and spending a lot of time with their family, and then they start to become a recluse and they start stepping back. So hypomania is a lesser form of mania. And again, to be quite honest with you, a lot of people do struggle with it because it can look like ADHD. It can look like OCD. So it can look like a lot of different forms of mental illness. And when we are paying closer attention or we're aware of it, so I've had a lot of hypomanic clients, so that's why I'm a little bit more in tune to it. And I'm like, you know, what's going on with you? I noticed you've kind of had an increase this week or this month. And I noticed you're getting a lot more done. You have a lot more self-esteem, a lot more confidence. You know, what's going on with you? And they'll just say, you know, I'm just feeling so good and things are just really flowing. And that might be the case. But a lot of times when I've been working with them long enough, I might be, okay, you're in a little bit of a hypomanic episode. So now that we know this, let's use this to our advantage, because that means your biology is kicking in at a higher level. So, you know, maybe those dreams that you wanted to accomplish, let's help you get there. Maybe you've been kind of slacking in school a little bit and you've been struggling to focus. Okay, well, now that we have this extra increase in dopamine and serotonin, let's use this to your advantage and help you structure your time so that when you are in this phase, it doesn't turn into a negative, where we can also see people gambling and smoking and doing drugs and having sex in a large spree. Now with hypomania, not as much as clinical like bipolar disorder, but it can be there to a certain extent, because again, they're still feeling that euphoric feeling and they want to keep that feeling going. Nobody wants to get off that train once they're on there, because that's where the joy of life really kind of kicks in, or at least that's the way they will feel a lot of times.
You nailed it.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that she nailed a lot of it. And really quick, I'll walk you through. I had never heard of that my entire life. You know, I was a 39, 40-year-old man in a treatment facility post-suicidal attempt. And my therapist had been working with me, my clinical psychologist and everything had been working with me, and my clinician and my team for like 3 or 4 months. And then they came to me and they said, hey, so, you know, and they always got to tiptoe around the diagnosis. They're like, you have hypomania. And I didn't take that well. I wasn't receiving that very well. You know, we don't want to be labeled. And that first initial shock of being labeled with something different, an illness, a sickness, or whatever it may be, a mental illness, it doesn't sit well. So we had some confrontation there. And she gave me a paper to go home and read. And I looked at it. And out of like 25 symptoms, I checked 24.9 of them. And so a week later, when I went into session, I said, well, hypothetically, if you were correct, then how would we proceed? And after you get over the initial shock of being labeled with something, a mental illness, it allows you, hopefully, and it took me some time though, so it takes time. It's not overnight, but it allows you to, just like Deandra was saying, so much incredible information, understand what's going on, and also how to use it to your benefit, and also how to be aware and careful of harms and things like that. Meditation. It's hard sometimes if you're in a hypomanic state to meditate, but if you can meditate in between those states, it helps your mind find peace. So again, every day that I say have hypomania, it's a hard pill to vocalize. But when I get support and I hear from people like, oh no, what's that? Or me too, or things like that, it helps make it a little easier. Because I don't want to feel like I'm on an island of mental illness, silently suffering, even though I am. So as long as we're able to perceive it less as an illness and more like, okay, well, now we know you're allergic to this food, we know not to eat peanuts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, it made me think about the, we talk a lot when we hear about alcoholism and people having to deal with that one day at a time. It's not a quick fix. You don't take a pill and all of a sudden you're not an alcoholic. So Deandra, talk to me a little bit about the behavioral changes that one can learn to manage based upon whatever your mental struggle is versus medication.
Yeah, so I can give you some very broad things because each diagnosis is different. Like the way that I'm going to approach someone with depression is not necessarily going to be the same way I'm going to approach someone with anxiety, which is not necessarily the same way I'm going to approach someone with a personality disorder, because we're in different realms, right? But there is a baseline of things that can help. The biggest thing, to be quite honest, to decrease emotionality in the biggest sense is sleep. People take it for granted. People don't think about it as often because we're in a go society, technology, this, that. But to be quite honest, and I can tell you all the way from the law students that I have on my caseload currently, all the way up to the doctors, all the way up to the stay-at-home moms, the number one thing I hear across the board is I don't get enough sleep. And that's why you have a high level of emotionality, more likely to burn out, more likely to be frazzled, overwhelmed, frustrated, sleep. And doctors say it all the time. And we just kind of are like, I'm just going to keep going because I am really enjoying, but it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference when you get 5 hours of sleep versus 6 hours of sleep versus 7 hours of sleep versus 8 hours of sleep. The way that you respond to things, the way that you take in information, it changes dramatically just based on getting enough rest. Most people are not getting the minimum of 7 to 7.5 hours. Most people are getting somewhere between 5 and 6.5. And it shows a difference. Like this past week, just to give you a brief example, I was talking to one of my law students today. And by the time she said hello, I said, what's wrong? Because something's wrong. And the first thing she said to me was, I haven't been sleeping and I've been emotionally eating. But it takes a really good professional to be able to pick up on those subtle differences because I am intentional, right? So I'm looking at facial expressions, I'm looking at gestures, I'm looking at inflection of voice, I'm looking at all these different things, and I'm taking everything you've told me and we've been working on in the past to where we're trying to go, which you told me your goals were. And I'm looking at what are these subtle differences, because those are the differences that change whether someone wants to commit suicide or not. Because that's when people feel connected to. And when they don't have that, it's huge.
That's incredible information. So Tamu, when you hear Deandra talk about the subtle changes in behavior that you have to be aware of, as a parent of a young adult going through this, what are you attuned to, and how have you had to learn how to pick up on those signals?
Yes, absolutely. I can say like ditto to everything that Deandra said. One thing that I do pay attention to is the sleep for sure. As my daughter was growing up, preteen and then teenager, one of the things that really helped was to stick to the routine. So even if it's spring break, right? I thought I was being nice and said, you can stay up a little later because we're on spring break and you don't have school the next day. No, you can't do that. I had to learn from experience. I let her stay up late and she couldn't, it was like really hampering her processing the next day, which then hampered everyone else's ability to enjoy the day. And when we went back and talked to her therapist, she's like, no, you have to stick to the routine. That's what's working. So one of the things as a parent is like, and there's not too many kids who want to go to bed, right? We have to stick to the routine, and she had to go to bed. She had to go to bed earlier than all the peers. At least that's what she thought. She was going to bed way earlier than anyone else, right? But that's what helped us be able to manage. And then also, I pay attention to the differences. Like Deandra said, the little subtle differences. So if my daughter is typically a more sort of laid back communicator, very articulate, but sort of laid back. And so if she comes like running in the room and she's all excited and she just tells me all these things really fast, that's a sign, right? That's not her normal way of being. So then we can begin to ask questions and see, do we need to reach out to the doctor? Does something need to be adjusted? Like, what's going on? What's causing this? So those are kind of two things. And then there was something else I wanted to mention about how you say things and how it's received differently, like Josh was mentioning. So one of the things that came up was when I would ask my daughter, when I would pick her up from school, how was your day? How did it go at school? I'm thinking I'm relaying care and love. She received it as, I didn't care about her. I only cared about her grades. And I'm like, what? And so the family therapist said, how would you like for your mom to ask? Because your mom is trying to show love. She does care. We wouldn't even be here, right? And my daughter said, just say, how are you? So I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. So they had us practice. So then I said, how are you, Naya? And the therapist was like, how was that? She was like, no, just say, how are you? Okay, right? So, but this is what made a difference to her. It made a difference to her, and she received that as love. So till this day, when she calls or when I first see her or whatever, because she's a freshman in college now, I say, how are you? And I just wait. And it like gives her the space to say whatever, and she feels safe because of that, using those three words instead of something else.
That is just astonishing to me. The difference between saying, how are you, Naya? And right. How are you? Or how was school today? I mean, those are things that, every parent on the planet, says to their child at some point. Right. But it's so interesting how different the way the brain works. You're receiving it differently. It's just astonishing to me. So Josh, how are, when you hear all of this, and I know you're nodding your head in agreement with so much of what you're hearing, how do you manage your mental health on a day-to-day basis? Just checking in to make sure that you don't ever get back to that dark place where you were once before.
Excellent question. Thank you. I'm nodding my head because I can relate to everything that everyone is saying right now. And it takes a very unique space to be able to hear something that's honestly comforting, that that, you know, you women and so many people are trying to understand the way that sometimes we think, you know, and I can completely relate with how was your day and being like, you know what I mean? And maybe the day, maybe it's not even just the grades. Maybe it's like the day was off. So it feels like you're poking what went wrong today. You know, maybe it was just a really bad day and you have no idea. And you're like, hey, how was your day? And you're like, for me, I feel like, wait a minute, you're poking at what went wrong today. And it's completely a disconnect, but it doesn't matter. In my distorted reality of hypomania or neurological disorders or alcoholism or bipolar or whatever it may be, my brain is intaking the information completely differently. So I just wanted to touch on that. But so moving forward, it's an excellent point or a question about what can I do to not get back to the dark place? And so first of all, there's a lot of things that can be done, but it's there. Sometimes it would be very naive for me to feel like, oh, I'm recovered and everything's wonderful. And, you know, it's all rainbows and unicorns, because there's going to be days that you don't want to get out of bed. And there's going to be times where you just don't want to be around anyone, or you question, why am I alive and why am I here? It's going to happen. The difference is that accepting it as, you know, in meditation world, they like to say be the observer a lot. Accepting it as the observer and it's just a thought, you know, maybe thinking for 2 seconds, like, well, I should take my life, or I don't want to be here anymore. It can be just a thought that just passes, versus latching on to that and holding on to it and manifesting it until it's actionable. Because it's okay to have thoughts. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's okay, but it's not very healthy to act on them. So for me, again, meditation, but I can only meditate maybe 50% of the time, 50 or 60% of the time. Obviously, I think that, you know, I struggle with this. Deandra mentioned emotional eating earlier. I don't have a specific food disorder or anything like that, but I definitely, if I'm, you know, feeling down, I definitely want to like order a box of donuts or something like that to like get a little dopamine, to get a little sugar rush, to like feel better about myself, to feel comforted, especially if I'm not feeling a connection, emotional or physical connection from anyone around me. I will feel a connection with, you know, some donuts or something like that. Trying to be more positive. Honestly, it starts with, you know, what are you thinking about? So for me, I wake up and I start praying right when I open my eyes. I need to think about what I'm grateful for every day, because it's a struggle. If we're not focusing on what we're grateful for, we're going to hold on to what is wrong in our life. We're going to grab that and we're going to hold on to it. And bipolar minds, hypomanic minds, addict minds are very powerful minds. Some of the most brilliant people on earth struggle with these syndromes. I mean, geniuses. And it's because our brains are neurologically wired a little bit differently. So you might have someone who's bipolar, who's got like a 150 IQ, you know what I mean? They're just processing information differently. And you know, I have a little bit of those symptoms. So in the morning I wake up and I have my 5 or 6 prayers that I like to say. And then I think about, what am I grateful for today? And I've learned that in slowing down that manic mind, it could be as simple as the sky is blue today. And I'm so grateful that it's a blue sky.
That's amazing.
And then throughout the day, just trying to remind myself of what I'm grateful for, what I'm thankful for. And trying to be aware. Awareness is something that I've learned in the last 2 years of, you know, being able to identify like, uh-oh, I'm starting to get angry. I'm starting to get short with people, and I don't want to be that. And so resentments is something that we learn in recovery, but it also works with people that struggle with mental illness, is that once you hold on to a resentment or a secret, it can fest, and it can manifest into something much bigger, a much bigger problem. So getting it out, talking to a therapist, talking to a friend, talking to a peer support. That's why in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have AA meetings where we go with peers and we can talk about what's going on with us. So it's this very similar.
It's all about human connection. It
Yes.
always comes back. It always comes back to that. A parent in the audience asked about how to reframe a conversation with their child struggling with mental illness. Here's Deandra's answer.
So when I work with parents, I always put them in their child's shoes. Every time I do parenting sessions, I meet with the kid half an hour, if it's an hour session, and to meet with the parent on the back end or something along those lines. And I always induce that feeling in them. What does it feel like to feel alone? What does it feel like to feel overwhelmed? What does it feel like to be in all these different things and racing and you can't tell up from down? And then how would you respond? A lot of times the parents are like, oh, I would respond just like how my kid is. Okay, so now let's take a step back. What would you want to say to yourself if you were in need and you wanted someone to support you? What would feel supported to you? And usually they'll say something like, oh, I just wanted them to ask me if I was okay, or I wanted help solving a problem, whatever the case may be. And then I'll bring the child back in. Okay, so now in that instance, when you're struggling and you can't communicate, what can we create as a way of a signal that you and I can know, whatever that word is, whatever that thing is, that you're struggling right now. And that's my opportunity to step in and help you. And so that, I think, the parents shift, because now they not only know what it feels like to be in that child's shoes, but then they have a better understanding of when a lack of communication is not necessarily an outburst. It could be that I'm just genuinely struggling with my feelings. Maybe I can't even identify them, but I know I need help. So I hope that helps, Kate, with a reframe.
I love what you just said, because it was so simple and yet so profound, because if we could just extrapolate that to all of our relationships, and I mean being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. What does it feel like to that person when this happens? If moving it away from mental health for a moment, although it's connected, to talk about the racial reckoning that we're having in our country right now. And then you could even talk about wearing a mask versus not wearing a mask, my rights versus your rights. We have got such a deficit of empathy in our world, particularly in our American society right now, that we do not think about what it means for someone else's feelings. And if we could just for a moment put ourselves in someone else's shoes and think about it from their perspective, it changes the entire dynamic. And as it relates to mental health, the question that I have for you, Deandra, is how do we know when we need help? We all know, we all go through stuff. We don't get enough sleep. We have different things that happen. Mute yourself for just a moment again. We all have different things that happen to us. But at some point, we get to a point where things are just not quite right. How do we know what that point is when we are ready and we need to reach out for help?
So thank you for that question, Linda. So that breaking point, I would say, is going to be different for everyone, because some people can endure a high level of stress. So like people that I see that are in the helping profession, when they need to reach out, it looks a little bit, a lot further past what probably most people look like. But genuinely, or generally rather, when you're feeling very fatigued, everything seems difficult or like a burden or a task that seems like a mountain that you have to climb just to do it. When you notice that you would rather be alone than speak to other people or be around other people, not that you're an introvert, but that you're intentionally saying, no, I need to take a step back from people, especially if it's family and you're typically really close with your family. I would say that's a huge red flag, because if you talk to your family on a pretty regular basis and now all of a sudden you're like, I haven't talked to my family in 2 weeks, I would be concerned about what's making you isolate away from them. When you're going to events and you just find that you're not enjoying it and you're there, but you're like almost glassy-eyed. You're there physically, but you're not mentally or emotionally there. You're checked out. You're just kind of standing watching the crowd. A lot of those are indicators that it may be time to seek some help. If you have a routine or a structure, which is good to help with preventing mental illness, but if you notice you're not keeping up with it, and now that same routine that's given you joy and structure and kind of consistency in your life is no longer working, that's usually a sign to start reaching out to some support, whether it is a friend or peer specialist or a therapist, a psychiatrist, sometimes PCPs, depending on the type of relationship you have with your PCP. Like that, when we start seeing these things around us kind of start to slowly deteriorate. Or the other thing is emotional responses. When I'm being really short with people, where normally I would actually give a pretty long explanation, or there's like no inflection of my voice. I'm just talking and it almost, even rambling sometimes, usually people do that when they're overwhelmed, frustrated, they have a lot on their mind and their plate, and they'll just kind of ramble. And then they'll kind of go back and be like, what was I saying again? Or what was the point? A lot of times that's a sign of being overwhelmed. And that can also be a time to reach out, because when you're overwhelmed, you're not functioning at your best capacity. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. It gives some real concrete information for that, things that we can be looking out for ourselves and among our loved ones. This next question is from a mother wanting to know the best way to suggest therapy to her son. Again, here's Deandra's answer.
So you have a son, 21 years old, who is struggling with OCD and may possibly have bipolar disorder. And then how do you pose the benefit of therapy or reaching out for help? That's kind of what I'm hearing. So the first thing, I can't substitute any medical advice. I don't know your son in any way, shape, or form to actually give something very specific and concrete or a plan. But just generally speaking, OCD and bipolar disorder can look a lot alike. One of the main differences, I would say, is compulsion numbers. What realm are those compulsions in? Or is it pure, where it's more intrusive thoughts? And what are those intrusive thoughts saying? What are they asking him to do? Because that's going to make a difference between OCD and then bipolar disorder, because bipolar disorder, is depression and mania. So when I'm not feeling well, I don't feel like doing anything, I'm fatigued, and then I'm feeling too great and everything is fun and I'm like on a roller coaster ride, and then it's like, when do I get off? So that's kind of, in a nutshell, looking for those differences in behavior and thoughts and patterns. I'm not going to lie to you, as a parent, I know you know your child, but I would say seek an expert who is well versed in OCD as far as the clinical diagnosis and the personality traits, as well as someone who specializes in bipolar disorder, because they can mask each other quickly in different signs and symptoms. The other thing is investment. A lot of people have this cliche, I'm too broke for therapy and all this other stuff. I hear you. However, what are you willing to invest in yourself in? If you're willing to invest in getting your hair done, your nails done, a new pair of Jordans, a new outfit, if you're willing to invest in a weekend with your friends, are you not worth the same value of investing in therapy? At 21 years old, that's going to say something. Because at 21, you feel invincible. It doesn't matter if you have mental health issues or not. You feel like you're on top of the world and you are an adult and you can do whatever you want. So in order for you to be that best adult and do whatever you want, what do you need to invest in to make yourself the best version of you? I wouldn't necessarily say you have to go to therapy, because again, when people feel forced, they don't want to do it. People want to come to their own conclusion that I need to go to therapy, right? So do you have a mentor? Do you have a peer support person? Do you have another person that you can chime into and allow them to pour into you and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you need to talk to somebody because I'm not the right person. People, one thing I appreciate about people today is they're very honest and upfront when they can, and I am as a therapist. Like, if I can't help you, I will tell you, I'm sorry. This is not my field of expertise. Let me get you to somebody that can help you, because at the end of the day, you're what's most important. And I need to ensure that you get the help that you need. And as far as I know, I've worked with a lot of peer support specialists in the past. They've been able to do that. If they have a friend and there's a friend struggling with mental illness, they'll probably say, you know what? I see a therapist online. I hear that a lot nowadays. Or I talk to my therapist once a week via telehealth. I don't go into the office, whatever the case may be. So mental health treatment is so much more accessible today. And I find that because people are making it important, right? Just as much as your physical health, your mental health is important because when you mentally don't feel well, 9 times out of 10, you physically don't feel well either. And it's just a mix of a snowball effect, right? So a lot of people are being transparent about that and allow people that are supportive of him to help guide that way, instead of forcing, like, you need to go to therapy or you need to do this, you need to do that. Because the first thing a 21-year-old will do is rebel.
So as we start to wrap things up, I want to, Tamu, I want to start with you and ask you for some final thoughts on what you'd like for people to take away from this conversation, the reason that you reached out to me in the first place and asked if we could have this conversation. So what is it that you want to leave people with today?
I want to just leave people with, you are not alone. Like, literally, you're not alone. And there's been a lot of great information shared today. I really appreciate this opportunity and the discussion that we've had. And to know, as a loved one or a parent, if you're going through something or you're trying to support your loved one, that there are resources, and it is a journey that continues. So as a parent, I wanted to find some type of solution, right? Some kind of magic thing, whether it's medication, treatment, approach, natural alternative. I was trying to find something that could, like, lift this from my child. And that's just not the case, but it can be managed. So I want people to know that there is hope. And even if it seems like the light at the end of the tunnel is far, far away, there is still a light. There's still a speck of light. So focus on that and be encouraged and reach out. Reach out. That's the main thing. Tell someone. And like Deandra mentioned, there's so many more resources out there today. I know, and I'll mention one that my daughter really likes, is the crisis text line, where you can, and I actually was trained as a crisis text line counselor, just to volunteer and be of service, but you can just text help or start or go any word to 741-741. And they have trained crisis counselors on the other line that can help you via text. Because sometimes you don't want to pick up the phone, you don't want to go somewhere, but you can get this help on text. And they're even able to, if you are in a crisis and they need to send help, they can get your location and send local help to you no matter where you are in the country. So that's just a good resource to know for those of us who are attached to our phone, and particularly the younger people might be more comfortable with that, at least as a starting point. So, thank you.
That is such great information. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tamu. Josh, I'm going to throw it over to you now and ask what you'd like to leave our audience with today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of great information was shared. I think that I want to leave the audience with, just try to be loving, supportive, and understanding. Patience over anything. We might look and sound normal, but the wiring in our brains is a little bit different from everybody else's. And sometimes it's easy to forget that. Sometimes people get frustrated with me because they think that I'm a super, intelligent, successful individual, but that doesn't mean that I'm not receiving your information or communication completely different. And so there's a disconnect. And I think that just be patient and be positive more than anything. We can be very frustrating. Again, I don't want to put us into a box or anything like that, but if you're struggling with, or not even struggling, if you're living with bipolar or hypomania or suicidal thoughts or depression or anything like that, I mean, we're normal people too. Just be patient and be loving and do the best you can. I would be one, because I'm not a clinician, to say we all need therapy. Therapy is pretty incredible. I found an amazing therapist and it's changed my life. So if you're open-minded to therapy because a lot of people have such a negative connotation of it. So many people think that if they're going to a therapist, something's wrong. I'm telling you, I told my therapist the other day, like, you're stuck with me for years. And she's like, okay, let's do some work. You know what I mean? And because you can, as soon as you get into that comfortable place where you put your guard down and you're willing to receive the information, like when I was first diagnosed, with hypomania, I had my walls up and I thought it was an attack from all sides. And so I didn't want to hear anything that anyone had to say. So moving forward, 2 years later, I am so blessed that I was diagnosed, because now I have a better understanding of how I think and what's going on. So again, I think it's just to be patient, be supportive, and try. You're never really going to understand how we think unless you have one of these mental illnesses. Just be supportive. It's probably it.
It's so beautiful, Josh. Thank you. Thank you so much. Deandra, you get the last word here as the clinician on the panel, the coach, the therapist who works directly with clients. And you've already given us such a wealth of information today. What are your final thoughts and words of encouragement to those who are listening?
Thank you. So, and I appreciate each and every single one of you. It's been a true honor to share a stage with each of you today. One thing that I would like to leave you with, because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, is to use your mental illness as your mental wealth and your superpower. There are a lot of people who are struggling. There are a lot of people who are looking for you to tell your story. And if you do that, you literally can save someone's life. I can't tell you how many times I have told people, I have a traumatic brain injury. And they're like, oh my God, you have no idea. I do too. You know what it feels like. And I do. And so the same thing as a therapist, be vulnerable, be willing to share your story and help other people. Because if we can have greater compassion and empathy, we can go a long way in the world. And so I leave you with that.
That is so perfect, because that is what this podcast is all about. It is about encouragement and empathy and having compassion for our fellow humans and for sharing our stories, because it's when we do that, that's when we see ourselves in each other. And if we can see a little glimpse of ourselves in someone else, then that makes us more open to connection to that person. And then we start to peel away at all of the divisions that are there and literally tearing us apart right now. This has been such a joy for me and a real honor to share the stage with all of you. I thank you, each one of you, for your courage and your vulnerability and your time and your talent and your stories, for sharing your stories and helping us have this conversation that we really need to be having every single day, so that we can all stay mentally healthy and be our best selves. So thank you all so much. Thank you to the audience for spending this time with us. This is our Voices Matter podcast. We always thank you for giving our guests permission to speak and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.
I so appreciate all of you for spending part of your day and taking time to enjoy this conversation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and be sure to like and share and spread the word among your friends. We so appreciate everything that you bring to the Our Voices Matter podcast community. We'll see you next time.